People remember information from speeches that are clearly organized and forget information from speeches that are poorly organized. When speakers are not organized, they are not perceived as credible, and their audiences view the speeches negatively, are less likely to be persuaded, and don't remember specific information from the speeches after the fact. When creating a speech, it's important to remember that speeches have three clear parts: an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. The introduction establishes the topic and whets your audience's appetite, and the conclusion wraps everything up at the end of your speech. The real meat of your speech happens in the body. In this section, I'm going to discuss how to think strategically about the body of your speech. I like the word strategic because it refers to determining what is important or essential to the overall plan or purpose of your speech. Too often, new speakers just throw information together and stand up and start speaking. When that happens, audience members are left confused, and the reason for the speech may get lost. Recall that a speech can have one of three general purposes: to inform, to persuade, or to entertain. The general purpose refers to the broad goal for creating and delivering a speech. The specific purpose, on the other hand, starts with one of those broad goals, informing, persuading, or entertaining, and then further informs the listener about who, what, when, where, why, and how of the speech. The specific purpose is stated as a sentence incorporating the general purpose, the specific audience for the speech, and a prepositional phrase that summarizes the topic. In each of these three examples, you'll notice that the general topic is the same: open source software, but the specific purpose is different because the speech has a different general purpose and a different general audience. So in this one, if the general purpose was to inform, we're going to inform a group of school administrators about the various open source software packages that could be utilized in their school districts. If it was to persuade, we could persuade a group of college students to make the switch to Microsoft Office. If it was to entertain, I might try to entertain members of a business organization with a mock eulogy of pay for software giants as a result of the proliferation of open source alternatives. While there is no magic number for how many main points a speech should have, speech experts generally agree that the fewer number of main points, the better. For speeches you'll give in a typical public speaking class, you'll usually just have 2 or 3 main points. If your speech is less than 3 minutes long, then 2 main points will probably work best. If your speech is between 3 and 10 minutes in length, then it makes more sense to use 3 main points. Research from listening shows that anything more than 3 points will not be remembered. That is enough time to really develop with research 2 to 3 points in your allotted time. Another major question to ask yourself about your main points is whether or not they have parallel structure. By parallel structure, we mean that you should structure your main points so that they all sound similar. When all your main points sound similar, it's simply easier for your audience to remember your main points. I will cover the top 7 organizational patterns that students use with speeches. Some are better suited for informative speeches, others for persuasive speeches. We will touch on that as we get to each one. Pattern number 1. The most common pattern for organizing either kind of speech is by categories or topics. The categories function as a way to help the speaker organize the message in a consistent fashion. The goal of a topical speech pattern is to create categories or chunks of information that go together and help you support your original specific purpose. Let's look at an example. In this case, we have a speaker trying to persuade a group of high school juniors to attend UNT. To persuade this group, the speaker has divided the information into 3 basic categories: what it's like to live in the dorms, what classes are like, and what life is like on campus. The main points in this example could be rearranged and the organizational pattern would still be effective because there is no inherent logic to the sequence of points. Another method for organizing main points is the comparison-contrast speech pattern. While this pattern clearly lends itself easily to 2 main points, you could also add a third point by giving basic information about what is being compared and contrasted. Let's look at the 2 examples. The first one here is 2-point example. The second is a 3-point example. You can see in the first one, the speaker limits the speech to just similarity and difference, while in the second one, the speaker added a third point of the basic purposes of both drugs. This pattern works well for both informative and persuasive speeches. The spatial speech pattern organizes information according to how things fit together in physical space. This pattern is best used when your main points are oriented to different locations that can exist independently. The basic reason to choose this format is to show that the main points have clear locations. In this example, you'll notice that the groupings of states were created because of their locations to one another. The states created 3 spatial territories to explain. This pattern works best for informative speeches as there is not a place to add a call to action in the end. The chronological speech pattern places the main idea in the time order in which items appear, whether backwards or forwards. Here's an example. We're looking at the writings of Winston Churchill in relation to World War II, before, during, and after. By placing his writings into these 3 categories, we develop a system for understanding this material based on Churchill's own life. Note that you could also use reverse chronological order and start with Churchill's writings after World War II, progressing backwards to his earlier writings. Depending on the topic, this pattern could be used for either informative or persuasive speaking. As you might guess, biographical speech patterns are generally used when a speaker wants to describe a person's life, either a speaker's own life, the life of someone they know personally, or the life of a famous person. By nature of this speech organizational pattern, these speeches tend to be informative or entertaining. They're usually not persuasive. Let's look at an example. In this example, we see how Brian Warner, through 3 major periods of his life, ultimately became the musician known as Marilyn Manson. In this example, these 3 stages are presented in chronological order, but the biographical nature does not have to be chronological. For example, it could compare and contrast different periods of the subject's life, or it could focus topically on the subject's different accomplishments. Your choice. The causal speech pattern is used to explain cause and effect relationships. When you use a causal speech pattern, the speech will have 2 basic main points, cause and effect. In the first main point, typically you will talk about the causes of a phenomenon, and in the second main point, you will then show how the causes lead to either a specific effect or a small set of effects. Let's look at this example. A causal organizational pattern can also begin with an effect and then explore 1 or 2 causes. If you add a solution to the speech, then you are most likely trying to persuade the audience to change their actions or way of thinking. This pattern can be used with either informative or persuasive speaking. Each of the preceding organizational patterns is potentially useful for organizing the main points of your speech. However, not all organizational patterns work for all speeches. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the biographical pattern is useful when you are telling the story of someone's life. Some other patterns, particularly comparison, contrast, and problem, cause, solution, are well suited for persuasive speaking. Your challenge is to choose the best pattern for the particular speech you are giving. Good luck!